think if you put an S on the end of the word future, it emphasizes the fact that there's a number of possible and different futures. And that then says that the actual future that any one of us experiences is a matter of choice. And I think that notion of disassociating the future from something inevitable to being something which is actually brought about by a conscious set of decisions from choosing amongst alternatives is a much better way to think about it. And the key thing is, and this is why Rashomon is there, is if you don't know this film, I highly recommend it. I think it should be a prerequisite for anybody thinking about the future, but also about the past, is there's no single history, there's no single truth about the past or the future. And Rashomon's all about how a single incident is described by a number of different eyewitnesses, and they all have very, very different stories. And so this is the other part, there is no single future. So even if I'm right, it may not have anything to do with the future that you have. And therefore, you notice I've just copped out of everything, and we haven't even started. So what we can say is go to another Canadian and sort of speak to William Gibson, who has said words to the following effect, that the future is already here, it's just not uniformly distributed. Most people just won't notice it. And in some sense, I could stop now and just say, if you want to see the future, just look around you, it's already there. Now, the intuitive way to understand, or maybe believe what I'm saying is, if those of us of a certain age, I'd challenge you to tell me that there is a single thing that's causing all of the excitement and economic boost and so on in our culture today that you didn't know about from a technological perspective at least 10 years ago. And I argue that's true. I've had the same email address since 1975. I've been on the internet since 1975. I first used a mouse in 1971. All of that was in Canada, by the way. The National Research Council in Ottawa had a mouse from 1968. That was probably the second mouse in the world. So we all knew that this stuff was going to happen. Now, if I understood what it meant, if I understood of the things I knew about and that you knew about 10 years ago, if we understood what they meant, we would own Microsoft as opposed to work for it. But that's a whole other thing, is understanding the implications of what we know is going to happen among things. So that's a little bit what I want to talk about. So I am going to tell you about the future of computing and how information technologies and how it is. So I know we've all started off with, many of us with card punch things. We've gone through this history of computers. So it's early in the morning, and so you can close your eyes for a second. I want you to visualize, here's the future. This is what it's going to be like. This is what our homes are going to be like. This is what our offices are going to be like, our schools, and everything about computing and how computing interacts with it. Are you ready? Because this is the big reveal. This is like, bang, okay? Here we go. There it is. Okay? Okay. Maybe it's the wrong slide. I'm messing with you. I'll make it simpler. Let's talk about the future of phones, because RIM's down the road, great company. Mobile is really important. That's where the future is. So let's just try and say, what's the future of phones? Well, okay, so maybe it wasn't an accident the first time, because it certainly wasn't the third. But all right, let's visualize a phone, because we all know what a phone is. Because we all who does not have a phone? Okay, so we all know what a phone is. Okay, there we are. All right, now I'll stop messing with you. Here's what I believe. If you want to know what the future is going to be like and the ecosystem within which we are living and functioning, you need look no further than your car. I actually own that very car. car. Well, actually, mine's black, but. Now, let's start off. I want everybody to put up their hand. And now, I'm going to start from the bottom. And when I hit a number which equals the most expensive personal computer you've bought with your own money, I want you to take your hand down. $100, $200, $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. There's only one honest person in this room. He still has his hand up, he's back there. You could stand up and take a bow if you want. But here's the deal. If you own a $30,000 car, you own a $10,000 personal computer. That in fact, 1/3 of the cost of a modern automobile is in the information systems. The cable harness alone vies with the engine of a modern vehicle as the most expensive single component in that vehicle. Furthermore, if you're a propeller head like me, when I'm wearing my Microsoft hat, you will know that all of the fancy $5 words that are tossed around in information technology, things like ambient intelligence, remote sensing, sensor networks, all this stuff, embedded computing, all those things are in your vehicle. When you push that brake, that is not a brake pedal, that is a mouse. And the mouse is talking to software running on a microprocessor that has a display, and the display happens to be the calipers on the disc brakes. And furthermore, the model of computation in that vehicle has all of the fancy-dancy things, none of which are taught at universities, especially in compulsory courses, that is fully parallel, distributed computing, all networked, never crashes unless the driver hits the wall or goes off the road, and it works reliably. Now, you sit there and say, well, is that really what is going on with computing? I would argue that if you think about it this way, your vehicle and the information systems that are embedded in that vehicle are exactly what's going to be in your home and your office. And by the way, notice your vehicle is in fact a building. It is simply a very special purpose building that's meant to be mobile. But it has doors, it has a furnace, it has an entertainment system, it has a kitchen counter. It's called the dashboard. If you here at 8 o'clock in the morning, you used it this morning. And it has a storage locker at the back. It has all these things. And if you simply recognize that the principal difference between that building and this building is that the architect of that building that every one of us owns, the architect had control over the digital infrastructure that went into that building. So my friend Wayne Cherry, he used to be head of design for the executive VP of design for General Motors. He had more say about what went into his buildings, whereas Frank Gehry, or you take any of your super star architects, they have no say whatsoever what goes in terms of infrastructure. But I'm telling you that your buildings are going to be built like your cars. And one of the things we could do that's really interesting is, what if we started educating our students so that they understood something other than LR1 parsers and von Neumann architectures and the same old, and started thinking about all of these sensor networks and so on and so forth. The properties of the car are really interesting because those computational systems have way more input than output because of the sensor networks. It's a lot like remote sensing. So there's some really interesting things to learn from this, but it's even more than that. I did mention phones, and that car is my phone. And I would argue that if you think you know what a phone is, you have no business being in the phone business. Nobody should be allowed to work at Microsoft on our mobile phone business if they think they know what a phone is, because that immediately constrains their vision into what was there before. But if you look at my mobile phone, actually this is my mobile phone on my wrist, but if you look at your mobile phone, when I'm alone and away from my vehicle, it's a standalone island. It works by itself. It's wonderful. But the minute I walk into my car and start driving, where is the phone? Because it turns down the stereo when my phone rings, and I answer it completely hands-free and eyes-free. It uses the car stereo for the speakers. It uses the microphone that's embedded in the steering wheel as the microphone. And all of a sudden, this wearable technology, which is my G3 phone, this actually is a video phone. I'm not joking, actually. that it becomes part of the car. And I'm in the middle of a conversation with you, and as I turn off my car and step out, it automatically and seamlessly hands off to my phone back here. And so all of a sudden, the nature of what my phone is completely changes. And because of that complete change, I don't notice the change because my relationship, my environment, in terms of the activity and the location where it's situated has changed. And therefore, it's just natural that the nature of the phone changes underneath me in an appropriate manner. There is no such thing as a phone. The only operational definition of a mobile phone is a technology, any technology, which appropriately enables remote conversations to take place. And that will encompass Skype, it'll encompass mobile phones, it'll encompass the phone that's in the car. But from a technological perspective, there is not a single thing, there's not a single thing that's persistent across every aspect of a phone we have. It's not the microphone, it's not the speaker. We've already proven that because it switches from the microphone to the speakerphone that's in this versus what's, when I use this SIM in this watch in my car, different speakers. The phone number is the only consistent thing. But my phone at home doesn't have a SIM chip, so it can't be the SIM chip. It's the conversation that matters and how that conversation is facilitated by the technologies. And so what we've seen in this example with the car is how buildings with embedded technologies, which are completely transparent, that you're not even aware you bought, are transparent, and by having more of them, you have less complexity and more safe ability to function in the environment. And furthermore, the things that are embedded in the buildings and in the environment interact seamlessly with those personal technologies we have with us so that everything happens in an appropriate manner. And what I'm going to say is that I don't care if you have a great new product. Those are gadgets, and I have a huge collection of gadgets. I collect them. I love them as a geek. But as a designer, as a businessman, as a researcher, that's not where the problems are. If you can't build a great gadget that has great customer appeal and that works and is serviceable and so on and so forth, you shouldn't be in business any more than a designer of a bridge shouldn't win any awards just because their bridge doesn't fall down. You take that for granted. Now, tell me why I should have you, Mr. Competent Engineer, build my bridge instead of you. What's the value added? Then we get into an interesting space. And that comes back to technologies. Now, if we believe this, then we can play with this a bit more and sort of say, so, in retrospect, what I just told you, everything I just told you, in some ways you already knew. But there's this little catch here, is that the obvious isn't always evident. So what I really want to do is say to you, I'm not going to tell you anything today that you don't already know in retrospect. It's a funny way of saying things. Even when you hear it, it will sound obvious. But it wasn't evident, maybe perhaps, before I said it. If that's true, then maybe it's worthwhile being here. And if it's not, well, I'm sorry. I apologize for being banal. But this does say that when we start thinking about the nature of innovation and creativity, that we have to think of a few things. And one of them is that if this is true, that the obvious is not always evident, it leads me to my favorite definition of, or the favorite type of innovation. Most people look at innovation as accelerated evolution. So you have an evolutionary path where things are going. We see things going there, but we can it's like an arms race. We leap ahead of the competition because we had some clever way to do it, and we go along the predictable path, but at a faster rate than our competitors. Now, all of us should be able to do that. And that's just a journeyman professional thing to do. But that's not where the sweet spots are. The sweet spots play on this statement, and it's what I call surprising obviousness. It's the kind of thing that you see the idea, you see it for the first time, you've never seen it before, but you recognize it instantly as something that you need, that you've always wanted, and you just never could put words to it and see it before. And actually, when you start to do it at a certain point, if you're doing it for a customer because you're a consultant, they're going to say, wow, that's fantastic. I need it instantly. That's brilliant. I really want that. Man, I could have thought of that. But after a while, get paid really fast, by the way, because very soon they're going to say, I did think about that. I used to say, and finally say, what did you do? It was obvious. Why should I pay you? Right? And that's in some ways the best kind of idea, because those are the ideas that go viral. How do you do surprising obviousness? And so I'm going to push down that path because I finished the talk already, just the car, that's all it took. Now, the thing about this I want to say is that it's not creativity or great ideas that's the problem. The place we need to innovate the most is actually in our processes, in our behaviors, and our culture, not in the technologies. Because technologies aren't companies, technologies aren't products, technologies aren't businesses. And very few people at the early stages of the career recognize that. And so let's just go down this path and talk a little bit about the process of innovation, how we can understand it, and then, having understood it, know how to exploit it. So Chris Anderson wrote a paper in Wired magazine and later on a book called The Long Tail. So I'm going to steal from that, because all good innovation rips off somebody else in a great way. The same way that Keith Richards rips off Chuck Berry. He's not ripping him off. He's showing respect to somebody who really admires and trying to put a new twist to the lick, the riff. You know? So I just flipped around from the long tail to the long nose. And so there's two things we know in history of literature of long noses. There's Pinocchio, which says I'm a biggest liar in the world because it's really a long nose, or I'm Cyrano de Bergerac and I'm just a great lover of ideas. I'm married, you know. Got to direct your energies. So let's look at this long nose. And what the long nose tells us, and there's very solid data to support what I'm saying, is that there's a 20-year interval from the time an idea first germinates to the point it becomes a billion-dollar industry. And it's a very Canadian graph because it's your typical hockey stick graph. But the hockey stick is lying down. The crook comes at the very end of the 20-year period. Now, already, I've told you something that is really, really important to understand, that fundamentally changes how we think about innovation, invention, creativity, and so on and so forth. Pretend I'm right, okay? And I'm going to try and convince you that I am right. I've got data, so I must be right. If this is true, what this says is that any idea which is going to become a billion-dollar industry in the next 10 years is already 10 years old. Let me repeat. Any idea that's going to become a billion-dollar industry in the next 10 years is already 10 years old. And the implication of that is that it's not some new invention, some new technology which is going to change our world. It's somebody just picking up what's been sitting there for 10 years and saying, wow, if I just took that and this together and I brought it with this proper business partners and I put that distribution channel and I got my manufacturing down, I've got a business. It's just picking stuff up. And if you want to think of it this way, instead of thinking about invention and innovation and so on as alchemy, where you make gold out of nothing because you're a genius and you just had this flash of genius like Edison. Well, actually, Edison never did that. He had really good lawyers. He was a really brutal guy. He didn't invent most of what he's credited with inventing. He's a fantastic talent scout, and then with a big stick and deep pockets. He picked up what was there and had a factory of people doing his inventions. So let's work on this then a bit more. If everything's lying on the ground right in front of us, why don't we see it? And the reason is it's lying below the radar. It's completely public. It's perfectly there for anybody who chooses to look. But think about what I'm talking about. What I'm describing is the mining industry. That's the one thing Canadians are world class in. We really understand this. And we understand that mining is preceded by prospecting. And there's skill sets and training and tools and technologies which are important for doing prospecting. All you need to do is stick your head below the Canadian Shield. You might love canoeing up in the north, might love it, but that place you're portaging over, there may be a gold mine under there, and you have no idea unless you're a prospector or a geologist and you have the right tools and training to look. Now, let me give you an example. In 1984, here in Toronto, up the street, the University of Toronto, is where the first multi-touch systems were ever done. And it wasn't by me, but in 1984, my group was doing them. And in 1985, we published and made the first papers on multi-touch ever to appear in the literature. Okay? Now, there, with no patents, in peer-reviewed open literature, multi-touch was described. Now, there were many companies, 2 of them Canadian, that started to commercialize multi-touch along the way. A third one was a company that grew out of some research at the University of Delaware. And then we hit 2007. And that's when Microsoft showed Microsoft Surface for the first time, and the iPhone was shown for the first time. And all of a sudden, multi-touch was the coolest, most amazing new technology that had just been discovered. I mean, Steve Jobs, at the launch of the iPhone, said, in the last 2 years, we've invented this thing called multi-touch, and boy, have we patented the heck out of it, and it's fantastic. Well, I am a historian. I make a conscious effort to study history because the long nose tells me that's where the future is. So that's why I study the history, in order to pick up the pieces to make the future. I know the difference between marketing and history. And I know Steve personally, so I get it. I know how to interpret those types of statements. The critical thing is this. It had been around for anybody who wanted it since 1984. And I saw it in 1985 on a screen at Bell Labs already. They were showing it at Bell Labs. It was available in multiple labs by the mid-'80s. The mouse was invented in 1965. It was shown publicly in 1967. In 1968, the National Research Council in Ottawa already had one. I saw it there in 1971. Xerox PARC got one in 1973. The first commercial mouse was released in 1982. The Macintosh in 1984. That only garnered 8% market share. And it wasn't until 1995, 30 years later, that with Windows 95, that everybody had to have a mouse. An idea that every single one of us who saw it, knew it was a fantastic idea and was the future. It still took 30 years. So what about your idea, which is not as obvious as the mouse, right? The obvious is not always evident. The value of the obvious is not always evident. And therefore, it's all about not just mining, or prospecting, it's about mining, and then it's about refinement, and then it's about all the smelting and stuff like that, and transportation, and then it's about goldsmithing, so you make it worth more than its weight in gold. Then you've got a great product. But what I'm trying to say is, if you use the metaphor of mining rather than of light bulbs flashing and Edison as your model of the nature of innovation, and you couple it to the long nose, then you start to understand the nature of the beast. And if we all follow the myths that we were taught in school, we're going to get it wrong. And our students are going to get it wrong because they're chasing a false and impossible dream. Apple does not follow that model. Jonathan Ive is riffing off of work of previous people. If you ask me during questions, I can give you some examples if you want, but everybody does it. And of course, there's different segments in this process. There's the tip of the nose, where things, the basic research happens. There's a middle part, let's say, where you have the refinement and augmentation, and there's a productization phase. Any jurisdiction that wants to be a player here needs to be invested in all three with a balanced portfolio. And it's up to us to decide where we do that. But what I can tell you is that in the private sector, in industry, the data tells us that if you lop off the tip of the nose and focus just on the middle and the back end, that it's most likely that productivity goes down and your return on investment in R&D goes down. And that's contrary to nearly all policy. I'm not going to go down that path, but I'm just going to tell you that that's the case. And furthermore, small businesses can, in fact, afford to, independent of universities, be on the tip of that nose. And I'm happy to answer that in questions. Now, if this is true, if really these things take so long in this apparently incredible fast wave of changing world of technology, let me be very clear. Some basic electronics here. You have to understand the difference between the volume of stuff that's coming versus the rate of which any single technology is changing. And no matter how much faster things seem to be changing today, any particular technology is not evolving any faster now than it was historically. There's just more people doing it. And so it's the volume that's hitting you, not the rate of innovation on any single plane. That's, I think if you check the data from this perspective, you'll see that that's a true statement. And therefore, it's all the more important to figure out, how do I see these trends? And the one thing we need to understand is that if everything's there in front of us and we're not seeing it because we don't know how to stick our head below the radar, let me tell you how to do that. And one of the principal ways to do it is to recognize one of the things about ourselves. Human beings are not engineered to notice gradual, long, small, incremental change. How many people got kids? All right? Do your kids look older today than they were yesterday? They're the same age today as they were yesterday morning, right? Nothing's changed. But have you looked at a photograph of them a year ago? You've noticed the difference, right? That's why a lot of our families, every birthday, we go on the kitchen door, the pantry, and we do this. We measure our kids. We adopt a mechanism, an explicit mechanism, to overcome our weakness of seeing small incremental changes. Like, my kids look the same. All of a sudden, I don't know how because my eldest is 35 years old. Actually, it's amazing, since he's never changed one day to the next, but it's really amazing he came out of my wife. Okay? He's bigger than me. So something did change, I have to tell you. It wasn't my wife, except she got better. And she was always great. But you get the point. If with something we're as intimate with as our children, we have to take explicit measures to notice the changes, why on God's earth would we believe we don't have to do the same thing for all of the trends and parameters of the technologies that we work with? The closer and more intimate we are with them, the less likely we're going to see the change. That's the paradox. But as soon as we understand that about human nature, then we can start looking at these differences. And the main thing here is to recognize there's something called the order of magnitude rule. I invented it, so it must be a rule. And it says that if anything changes by an order of magnitude, it's no longer the same thing, even if every other aspect of it's the same. If there's more of them, it's cheaper, it's faster, and so on and so forth, it's a completely different thing. And we start monitoring for all these types of things. So let's keep going. Let's apply it to one thing. There's your desktop computer. Now, I'm just going to deal with one tiny thing, display real estate, to illustrate how we can see what's going on and how to actually tell where the opportunities are, the sweet spots to start to play. So we've got the desktop computer. Now we can go order of magnitude smaller displays, and we get to slates, and we get to mobile devices. And I put the slates actually came before mobile devices and handhelds, not after, which is a surprise to many people. They just weren't as much volume. But we also can go up the other direction. So we've got tabletop things. By the way, the Surface thing, some of the core technologies there were invented here in Toronto as well. Pearson Airport, the signage is replaced by these displays, and you're starting to see huge displays, such as the one we're looking at, projected displays, or other, in that case, OLED displays, which are going to become huge. Let's be clear. If you want to, I'll come back to this in a moment, but the displays, those great big paper posters on the subways of Toronto and so on the far side of the wall, they're all going to be digital electronic within the next few years. We have orders of magnitude larger, orders of magnitude smaller. And we start to see that there's some really interesting things going on here, because in the sense of our interaction with computers, the black line shows us where we've invested most of the time is just on this kind of form factor, the graphical user interface, all of our interactions designed here. The horrible things you've had on mobiles or on larger screens has been the fact that we just tried to make them be tiny or huge desktop computers, and that's simply, they're just not suited for that, and that's why they felt so bad to use. The opportunities come in and sort of saying, how do you transform, in terms of the growth, how we interact with these things and the small ones, and yet have them all work together? Now, already you realize two things. One, I've given you an example of an order of magnitude change, just something screen real estate. It was visible for decades that that's what was going to happen, but we haven't really figured out what the implications were. Although one of Canada's top startups has, of smart technologies in Calgary, they understood this trend was happening very, very early. So there's, in the mid-90s, they were already pushing on the stuff on the larger surface. And one argument you could make is that RIM has, part of their success has been trying to figure out how to work on the lower end. They pushed off on the order of magnitude and said it's different. Now, how is it different? What are the implications? But the next thing is it's not just about the technology. It's what does the technology enable in terms of changing the cost benefit that's what's possible so I get the timing right to bring out the right product or service. That is kind of neat. But I'm getting one thing wrong here. And the thing I'm getting wrong here is that this starts to be a reductionist, anal retentive kind of standard old, let's make a taxonomy and lay things out into things and do that. And if you start to believe this, what I just showed here, I'm giving you bad advice. So I'm going to set you up, show you the order of magnitude, that there's something here it's worth looking at. But remember what I said about Rashomon. There's multiple truths. This is, in one sense, this is one truth. But boy, if you think it's the whole truth, you're going to lose really a lot of other people's money as well as your own. The other thing is that this is completely wrong from the following perspective. It says that it's mobile, separated. I'm differentiating these things along an axis that says they're different things and we can just build products along that space. No. And we've already been proven that in the example of the car. That it's not about mobile devices versus big devices any more than it's about my mobile handset and my car. The true thing that happens is, yes, this is a dimension that's changing that we need to understand. But the holistic way of looking at the ecosystem, and that's how we have to view it, is this thing shouldn't be on a linear line. It should be some kind of recombinant DNA type of form, because it's not about the mobile versus the wall display. It's about how does each work on its own, and yet when I bring my mobile up to the display, how do they work together? Why can't you pull your mobile phone out, point at the screen, and grab my slide? Why can't you pull out your mobile phone right now, point at the screen, and work your finger to point at something or to throw something up here, if I allow you? Because your phone has no idea that it's in the same room as this, unlike your phone in your car. Because this building isn't as smart as our car. It will be and it should be. And it's the notion these things need to augment each other as opposed to work as islands. And that's one of the weaknesses. Now let me give you an example of how that's going to work. You know, notice I said not how it should work, how it's going to work, and in some places it already does. Okay, in Toronto, it's amazing. This blows me away, because I actually don't believe advertising works, but I have to look at the evidence and say, okay, even though I don't believe it doesn't make sense to me, it's there. We had a competition. So companies who got the right to pay for all of the public furniture in the city? So the city didn't have to pay for it. It's amazing, right? And Astro Media won. And it was a competition. So for 20 years, they got the privilege of buying, designing, and maintaining, installing and maintaining 27,000 pieces of public furniture in exchange for the advertising. And by the way, one of the criteria according to which they won the contract was the advertising couldn't be too intrusive or loud or ugly. So let's see, you're going to win, you get the privilege of spending the money to do all of that for 20 years. And by the way, the main benefit you get from it has to be played down in order to be able to win. And they still did it. And they still had to pay about $428 million over that period to the city, in addition to having to pay for the furniture itself. What a deal, right? Now, here's where seeing things or not seeing things gets us wrong. If you look at any of the advertising reports, breakdowns of advertising in business, you will see they talk about print advertising, outdoor advertising, and blah, blah, blah advertising on screen like televisions, and then they have digital. It's like my screen, they'll say different categorizations, it's nice taxonomy, it breaks down nice, it looks really good in the annual reports. And the marketing reports you pay all this money for, and it's so stupid and so misleading and so wrong that it misses the whole point, because everything's digital. Digital, that's like there's no category for paper. Why is there a category for digital? Everything's going to be digital. So now you have to say, what happens, because we're right back to my thing about big screens, what happens when every single place where you see an advertisement where that's a digital display that's on the network? Because that's what's happening. And it's already happening if you go to the right places in the world. So now what's going to happen is, and this is why remember I said the recombinant DNA about the small screens and big screens? This is the classic example. You're going to walk up to this ad, and you're going to pull out your mobile phone at the bus shelter, and you're just going to instantly connect to it, and up is going to pop a window. And you're going to get your app popping up on the ad. Because I want to get the travel information is just for me. Why would I use this stupid little screen on my mobile device, no matter how good it is, when I've got this honking big 3-foot by 5-foot screen? Why would I not do that? I mean, forget getting a map. Do you want to play Pong or whatever game you want? We can do whatever we want on those screens. And by doing that, notice the Nike swoosh is still there, right as a watermark, subtly, but right in the middle, so in the full field cone of vision, there's an imprint. But I have to be able to do this completely securely. Somebody has to manage the microtransactions so they know how many views have come and so forth. But notice what this does. It completely transforms the relationship between me and advertising. Instead of the advertising just bugging me, interfering and being this nuisance that I tolerate to get free television or free internet, instead of ads popping up on my application, I'm all of a sudden giving a service through the advertisement, and I'm having the applications pop up on the ads in a way that's completely secure, appropriate for location, and I can grab it. And you realize it's not about the mobile phone, and it's not about that. All of a sudden, that's my car with the embedded technology. This is my personal wearable stuff that's with me. And when I get close, things become different. And it's just like, right? My relationship to this guy has just changed dramatically. And all I can tell you is that my computer wouldn't have noticed, nor would yours, unless it's your car and your phone. In general, your computers don't understand that. If you go to the washrooms here, they have a 1-bit computer, the on-off switch. The toilets flush, the taps run, the blow dryers work. All of those things work by proximity, which basically says that our washrooms are smarter than our computers. And maybe they shouldn't be. I mean, I don't want to make stupider washrooms. I want to make smarter computers. But where they understand about things like proximity and interaction and intermediate connections. And notice that that pointing function is really interesting. When you had a Palm Pilot with such primitive, quote-unquote primitive technology as infrared, at least it was directional, so I knew that in confidence that if I pointed at you, you couldn't get the signal that the card I was sending to you. Bluetooth, fancy, fancy stuff, guess what? I have no way of knowing that, right? It's not susceptible to interference, it's got higher bandwidth, and it gives me no confidence because it doesn't have line of sight directionality and as well as proximity, right? It's very, very interesting when we start thinking about these things in other ways. But here's this notion. You have to take an ecological approach to design about these things. It's not about any single device. So try and understand some of these things. Let's just sort of say what's been changing and what hasn't. Because I said our whole purpose here is to see transitions, to see how things change and recognize them. And that there's order of magnitude that sort of says how do we recognize what are the dimensions in which we might be looking for order of magnitude changes. Now, if you go to most people and say, well, okay, we got to talk about change. We got Bill's talking about technology. What's been changing? If you do this at a cocktail party or dinner tonight with people who aren't here today, I say, what's been changing? What is really important we should pay attention to? People are going to say, in this order, smaller, faster, cheaper, more of them, and connectivity. Those are probably, that's the top of that list. Almost everybody's going to give it in that order. And finally, they're going to add input-output, maybe. Almost certainly not, actually. My take is, you've got to look at the world differently. Why would you look at the world the same way your competitors look at it? Y'all went to the same school, you read the same magazines, you go to the same conferences. Why do you expect they're having any meeting that's different than yours? You've got to figure a different way and get a different take. And my sense is that this list is in exactly the wrong order in terms of importance for your business and your career, and where the future's taking us, or where we're taking the future, hopefully, if we actually understand this stuff. So the dog can wag the tail instead of the tail of technology wagging the dog of society, right? I/O is the most important thing. That's the most important thing that's changing. The second thing is connectivity. The third thing is more of them, cheaper, faster, smaller. Why? It seems nuts to me for Canada to invest a single penny, if you can still get pennies, well, we can, but they're useless, but on smaller, faster, cheaper. That is inevitable. There's nothing you or I are going to do that's going to change that. So let somebody else pay for that. Just take it for granted. I/O connectivity and more of them, those are the things that make a difference. And those are the things that are ignored. Most people don't even think about input-output as the key factor. But that is what enables us to deal with things. So let me play this another way. If smaller, faster, cheaper is the wrong way around, why did we come up with that? Because it's a technocentric approach. We're analyzing the technology. And to be quite honest, I don't care about technology. The only technology I care about and I study is the technology of the human being, the wetware, right? And that's great, because that's how, at my age, I can still be current, is because it doesn't change that quickly. And that way, also, since I'm not vested in the digital technology, I can be cavalier and just throw it away the minute it served its purpose. I don't have any commitment to it. The real question that would generate my answer, my prioritization, would be who's doing what, where, when, why, and how, and with whom, and for how much. I think I've got that one there, yes. So if I do that, those are the changes that are important. That's the dynamic of the industry. And everything we do should be looking at things from that perspective. And if we looked at things from a human-centric perspective as opposed to the technocentric perspective, and we lead with the human, then the appropriate ordering, I/O and so on and so forth, and the other way around, is what would take us to the analysis that I ended up with in the first place. That's exactly the reverse order of what people who have a technocentric perspective would come up with. I've had full motion broadcast quality video conferencing on my desktop since 1988. I still can't believe that my father, who's 92 years old, has a laptop, but quite apart from that, that he's using Skype to talk to his great-grandchildren out in Alberta. That's the amazing thing. It's not that it's new. And by the way, because I've been working and helped, and I think I might have even coined the term telepresence for that purpose, because I'm an expert in it, it makes it all the more hard for me to understand or believe that my father's doing it. Because I know too much about how hard it is and stuff like that, and how hard it was to do when we started. So the fact he's doing it just blows me away. It's the I/O. When we started, a camera cost $1,000. Now it costs $1.50. Orders of magnitude changes, enable things, gets the timing right. Voice over IP and video over IP is now affordable. It wasn't back then. And all of a sudden, the world changes. But on a path that all of the fundamentals were well understood 20 plus years ago. Now, this is all good and fine, but we, again, can keep falling into this technocentric side of things. So let's come back to the phone, and let's come back to the car. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this is that you might start saying, well, there's certain things about the technologies that we just have to be able to get, like speech recognition or not. Well, let's talk about this for a second. One of the reasons we want our phone to be interconnected with our car is so that the behaviors of things change automatically. I don't have to rely on the person, right? If you're sending a message to me, because I'm going to figure out a way that we can both become incredibly rich if you give me your great idea and back and forth. Pretend I'm a venture capitalist. I'm not. If you're doing it by texting or by anything other than eyes-free and hands-free, you should lose your driver's license, right? Using that phone, if you're driving your car, you're going to hit that kid. Kid's dead. Lose your driver's license if you're using your phone in your car without totally eyes-free and totally hands-free. Even then, there's still task interference. On the other hand, if you're on a plane flying into San Jose Airport and you're sending the same message to me, and you're that woman, and I'm at the end of the line, the reality is, if you're using completely voice, in that case, you should lose your job, because that person beside you works for Apple. And what I'm trying to get at here is that the technologies, there's no such thing as the right interface, the right technology, the right I/O, or the right combination of this technology with that technology, independent of the social and the physical and the economic context within which it's functioning. The very same technology which should lose your driver's license in one situation, same message, same person, same phone, should lose your job if you use it in the other. And it's really interesting. And this brings us to one of the most important things that we have to understand, is that everything is best for something and worst for something else. And there's another place where you milk out and find the sweet spots. And the real trick is to understand this. And I'm going to just do one more example just to push this. By the way, this is Connect. It's this video game thing where it senses, it's a 3D camera that senses your body motion, so it's hands, you really can just move. Let's go to the tip of the long nose. The predecessor of this, the previous generation of technology, was the switch on the supermarket door that opens automatically through proximity when you come with your arms full of groceries. That was the 1.0 version of Connect, if you want to think about it. Connect just makes it more of the same. See, I always put things on this continuum of looking at the history to see there's something happened before that led up to what we're doing now, and it's part of an evolution. But there's my son, the 34-year-old, using the same video game, an Xbox, using Connect on an airplane in Air Canada. And I have to tell you that even though he's doing the same game, the same gesture, with the same technology, in this case, it's appropriate. In that case, he should get thrown off the plane. Right? Again, everything's best for something, worse for something else. It doesn't matter how cool it is. Even if it is the highest, fastest rate adoption of any consumer electronics product in the history of the world, which Connect is. It's completely wrong there. We have to understand that. And then you start to say, well, what should we do on the plane? That's what you do. You say, if it's best for something, worse for something else, okay, the best part's covered. Where's the worst part? Where's the hole to fill in? Where are the shadows so we can populate and shine light on them? That's the opportunity. And so if we say this, then we say the trick's knowing, if you want to get this right and you want to know where to direct your attention, it's know the first rule, everything's best for something, worse for something else, and then say, now, why, for whom, when, and what's the appropriate complementary technology, just as the voice in the car versus texting in the plane complement each other on the same handpiece. So what's the appropriate 360 that says, for all of these things, how do I get the right, do I have access to the appropriate voice, if you will, to let me perform the transaction? And that's where we go. And the challenge is that we have all kinds of tasks we do in the world, but where we've been before, there were only a few options available to us in terms of technologies to achieve them. And so the mapping was pretty simple. And what's important is as the technologies change now that are available to us, this number of tasks hasn't changed, but the number of tasks that we can apply specific technologies to is much wider. So we've got to start figuring out these different mappings. And the point is, the mappings changed whether you're in the car or in the plane or these other things. And if we can get that stuff right, we're in really great shape. But you have to understand the mapping criteria. So I'm going to go quickly to wrap up. This is really simple. We've got Moore's Law. Basically says, this is the real quick way of saying there's going to be more technology tomorrow than there is yesterday. And it's just growing, doubling every 18 months, right? My law says that the functionality we're going to promise our customers is going to grow at the rate of Moore's Law. And then there's this other thing that says, what's the growth of the human capacity? And it's flat. I'm a very generous man. I'm not having this decline despite my age. And this is actually known as God's law. And it says the number of neurons you have in your brain, how fast they fire, and so it's how fast you can learn, isn't growing at Moore's law. And this seems obvious, but it's not evident. Everybody knows Moore's law. Most people practice Buxton's law, but none of us understand this fundamental constraint of the customer, much less the people who have to build this stuff. And there's this thing called the threshold of complexity, or the frustration barrier. And if I actually am a doctor and I am a professor, so I can tell you that I've normalized the y-axes of God's law versus Buxton's law and Moore's law. And so when I do the y-intercept, we see that threshold of complexity, the frustration barrier, we've already reached it where we are. And that all of the functionality that we promise that lies above that threshold, even if you can show me the code, even if you can demonstrate it, doesn't exist in human terms for our customers. And the biggest thing facing us today is the burden of complexity that our technologies are placing upon our customers. That is what is going to kill us. And I don't care how good and how easy to use your individual product is. As we start going down this path of ubiquitous computing, the more gadgets you have, really simple gadgets, really well-designed gadgets, the more of them you have, there is still an accumulation of complexity which is unmanageable. And it's largely because the things don't work together. And the critical thing about our world, and this is one of the core competencies in Canada, better than any other jurisdiction in the world, I would argue, is that how to shrink that complexity and drop it down so all of the features, the capability lies below the threshold of frustration of our customers and our users. That it's manageable, it's usable, and accessible. And the only way we're going to do that is by recognizing that everything doesn't have to do everything all the time, that it's context location based, that the technologies we have can start to know where they are in terms of geographical position, but also social position. They can leverage each other the same way my phone leverages the car. And all of a sudden, by adding more technology in the right places, I get less complexity. And that's what we really have to do. And where we get this point where more is less, more of the right technology means less complexity. My car plus my phone is more technology, but the transparency, ease of use, and the appropriateness of use is better and less if I do it right. But the benefits go up, so more is more to the nth power in terms of value. And what this really says is that social computing is as much about the social relationships amongst the technologies in a situated social and physical context as it is about the society of people. And that it is, in my opinion, if you want the sweet spots, stop designing gadgets and start figuring out the architecture of an ecosystem where these things are cooperative, leverage each other in the same way your phone does your car, and start to get that right, and then you will leapfrog everybody. That's where, in my view, the future is and what we have to do. The most important thing is the human, and to make sure that our manifestation of the technology reflects the human needs and capabilities, what their ability to deal with complexity in a way that doesn't distort the human. And I would argue that, and have for about 35 years, that if you thought about technology as a mirror, and the quality of technology as the fidelity with which that mirror reflects me as a human, from the social, motor sensory, or cognitive and emotional sense, that the mirrors so far have been distortion mirrors. And the better we get the fidelity right, the better we serve our customers, the better our products will be, and the better we take the human as the most important technology in the entire equation. Okay, wrapping up, how do we do this? We have to change. We are building our companies and training our students along the way that got us to where we are, not where we have to go. Technocentric, engineering-driven solutions and companies are finished. At Microsoft Research, we have cognitive psychologists, ethnographers, anthropologists managing engineers at Microsoft Research. Not all the time, but we have that. It's a critical part. Take this T. We're humans. We only have certain capacity to learn and to deal with. The problems we're dealing with are really hard. Breadth of knowledge is by the x-axis. The depth is there. What this T symbolizes is that we can have literacy along a range of things, but we can only have depth in a much narrower domain because the problems are hard. And by the way, I don't want generalists. I want people who are very strong specific. So there's the expertise. That's the highly skilled part. Now, if we want to achieve what I'm talking about, the way we do it is by saying, you want this T-shaped person in design. You need that as one of the pillars of any industry that's going to survive going forward. We need the same type of T capability in depth, but broad literacy, but narrow, deep depth in technology, and the same thing on business. And by the magic of computer graphics, if we bring these things together, the part where they're literate gives a common ground of literacy that overlaps so that these three pillars can speak to each other in a common language while still maintaining their specific skills. And the combined breadth of the depth down here, the foundation on which the whole company or organization is based, is much broader. So that we can deal with the human side of things, the business side of things. Each one of these aspects, design, business, and technology, are essential, none are sufficient. You need depth in all three. You need them at the table from the very first meeting you have every day on your products, and you must have the same level not just of expertise, but of creativity and innovation in each one. If you have that, then I believe that we have the organizational structure that will let us bring a much broader view into any problem, different perspectives, so we will start to see the obvious. It will be evident. And we will be able to execute our products accordingly. In some sense, you could just sort of say the breadth of experience that's at the table here basically it addresses the fundamental question of innovation that was asked by Jimi Hendrix when he said, "Are you experienced?" Yes. Most companies, no. So just wrap up. I said at the beginning that one of the most important things is not to design a great product, but to design a great process and organization. Can we change our culture? Yes. It is about cultural change. These two dogs are my wife's dogs. All I can tell you is that we, as a society, changed our values and reorganized ourselves towards gender-neutral language. We've managed to do that, improve the culture. We changed our values. We changed our values about drinking and driving. We changed our values about smoking. And Digby and Tucker show us that if you had told me 20 years ago that I'd be walking around at night, picking up after these dogs, I would say you're crazy. And now if you don't do it, you're a sociopath. Our values change. If we become the first jurisdiction that sort of adopts these ideas and how to really do them collectively, where we, from the whole part of the ecosystem, from the educational system to how we structure our teams within our own companies, we basically give ourselves a huge competitive advantage. Having good ideas is not the problem. Great ideas are a dime a dozen. Get over it. They're not precious. The minute you treat ideas as precious, you're done. You become so anally retentive and tight, you can't function. The trick is focus on the people, focus on your culture, focus on your process, make them your primary places of innovation, and the products and technologies will take care of themselves, and you will be amazed at what we're capable of doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. Wasn't that a great and refreshing way to look at something new? We've got a few minutes to take some questions. We've got microphones, or you put your hand up, you can have one brought to you. If you could just identify yourself and ask a question for Bill, I'm sure he'd be happy to take it. Anybody?
Sure, go ahead. If you can grab a mic, there's one right behind you in the aisle. Can you go to the microphone in the aisle, then people can hear you. As could I.
So you're talking about how to integrate multiple technologies together, but how is that possible with so many companies out there? The standardization, you have Apple, you have Microsoft, you have RIM. How can they integrate together different technologies?
So the question is, okay, so yeah, this is all good in principle, the things should work together, but how do you make that happen? What I can tell you is that if I could give you a simple answer, it would probably be solved. And if we're as good as we pretend to be, we will thrive on asking hard questions. And so I'm not going to pretend I can give you a simple answer, but I'm going to pose what I think is a question that's a worthy question that's hard to answer. But it's the right question. And then it's a matter of design. Approach answering that question the same way you would approach any other engineering or design problem. And then first thing you do is start looking at what are the precedents? What have other people done? So one would say, go back to gender-neutral language. How did the women's movement make that happen? How do you make that happen within our society? Instead of sort of women being an oppressed subsection of society, oppressed companies in terms of interoperability. The music industry dealt with this. They had a huge problem. Products wouldn't work together. They developed something called MIDI by co-opetition across companies. The industry went up about a factor of 100-fold once they did that because it took the risk out and the value started to come out from everything you bought. So there's no simple answers. One of the reasons I'm at Microsoft is because that's a place where I can address this. What I'm talking about is exactly what I do for a living, exactly where I focus, exactly what I'm trying to do in my own work. And I'm perfectly comfortable telling you that that's what my research is about. We don't have to know it, but if we don't start asking it collectively, both in the industry and the academic side, which is represented here, just assume we're out towards the tip of the nose. If you come up with a really good answer and a good architecture, trust me, everybody will love you for it and it will get adopted. We can make these changes, and in fact, it's small groups of people are the only thing that ever have made any changes. Margaret Mead has a great line about that.
Can I ask you about your example of the bus stop design?
Yes.
Where someone was going to, their device was going to use up a public space.
Yep.
How do you design against the pathological so that somebody's putting up porn or somebody bogarting the screen for the whole time that they're waiting for the bus? How do you solve what is a social, like a public space as opposed to using a private space like the car?
So again, it's a really good question. And I keep coming back and sort of saying in some sense, what happened, let's deal with, not role playing, but here's what typically happens. When somebody when I make a statement like that, somebody's going to come and they're going to either ask the question the way you did, which is a good way, or they're going to say, that won't work, that's a stupid idea, and then dismiss it, especially if they're a manager, that's the end of the story, because here's the showstopper, right? Key thing is that there's a dark side to every idea. If everything's best for something and worse for something else, that means that if anybody comes to me with any idea, when they tell me how great it is, I'm going to insist that they can be as enthusiastic and as articulate as to when it fails as they are when it succeeds, or else they don't understand it. Now, what you've done is you've come to sort of say, okay, let's check the dark side here, which always exists by virtue of best for something, worse for something else. I would say that in taking that approach, you then start to come up with things which can lead to the great ideas that will stop your competitors and enable you to see a way around it. Now, the first place I look in that kind of question is, okay, what's happened traditionally with signage? How have we managed that? Now, with it digital, how do we handle it? Well, there's other ways. So right now, Yahoo, for example, at about 20 bus shelters in San Francisco already have big displays like that publicly deployed. They're not interactive, they don't interact with your mobile phone, but half of the technology is already there. So I would go down to San Francisco and spend some time seeing, do these things get broken? How are they abused? How are they used? What can we learn from that? I'd start taking my examples, and it's that kind of field work in the field. The first thing you did right, however, is you said, you didn't come up with a technological reason why it won't work, but a notion of the sociological and the human and the cultural. And that, the great news is we have way more experience about understanding that and what the strategies are than we do about the technologies, because the technologies are changing like crazy. Now, do we have people in our organization that can figure out how to do the social engineering and make the design affordances such to minimize the problem and then deal with the problems when they occur? And then can we do that in a way that's economical? Can we form a business? And what are the alliances? And the partners we would want, the people we would hire would probably be different. But the key thing is, and this is why I'm really grateful for your question, is it may be a question that would not normally come up in the cases where people were designing the technology, if they were just a technocentric company. And if there was an easy answer, it would already be solved. In Stockholm and Vienna and a number of other places, the issue doesn't happen because they're in subways. This type of thing's already happening, not so much with mobile, but they're using projection, so they can't actually get to the display. So it's on the far side. And the neat thing about subways is the first place it's going to happen because you can get, projectors are big, and there's no ambient light. You can control the lighting, so you can actually start deploying really quickly, except in Toronto or Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, during your talk, you You mentioned that small companies could participate in the invention part of the process, and
Yeah.
I wonder if you could drill down a little more on that comment.
I'd love to. I almost gave the entire talk on that. So I was at Xerox PARC. So Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in the 70s was when I started to have a relationship with them, is where local area networks, laser printers, the bitmap display, it's where Steve Jobs went to get the idea for the Macintosh. It was the place to be. It's where ubiquitous computing first happened, where telepresence first happened. I was a senior researcher there. I left Xerox PARC in 1994 because I believed that small companies could do this. I believed that it was a myth that you had to be the size of Microsoft or IBM in order to support basic research. And so I joined a company. I was invited by a guy named Rob Burgess, who was president and CEO of a company in town here called Alias Wavefront. It was called Alias Research at the time. It hadn't been acquired yet. And the mandate he gave me was, okay, you can have 1% of revenue. I'm simplifying this. 1% of revenue to set up a research group, and you can hire within that, and that's your budget. And my team had the following thing. They had to publish in the peer-reviewed scientific literature at a level that would get them tenure at Stanford in order to keep their job. Plus, we had to set up an IP program and start to generate some patents. And that's what I did. I left that company in 2002. The size of my group is now 3 times that size, 3 to 4 times the size it was when I left it. The company's gone through something like 7 presidents changes, I think 4 changes of ownership. And the last one is they were acquired by Autodesk. Most of the company, the engineering part and everything has reduced. So there's only 1/3 of the number of employees in the company resident in Toronto of Autodesk, but the research group is tripled or quadrupled in size in that same period. So it clearly had value, and it's still there. It's been there. I've been gone longer than I was there. It's not about me. Right here in Toronto is one of the best examples of, and if you want to go talk to Gord Kurtenbach, who's the director of research, and they do not report to the VP of engineering. They report directly to the executive level. They are not part of the product chain. They do not get financed from doing contract research internally. The financing comes directly from a direct allocation from the CEO, and exactly at Microsoft. And the model at Microsoft is exactly the same model. And they were not allowed. I forbade contracting work to universities. And that's a whole other story. But there's an existence proof right here in the city. And some of the smartest people. And by the way, every time Microsoft Research has gone head to head with what is now Autodesk for hiring PhDs, the brightest and best, they've won. Because people like working for small companies where they can have impact. And the revenue of that company when I joined was $80 million. Okay?
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions.
My short question is, can I shorten the nose? My job is to implement innovation in the mining industry, which is in a race to be second in everything. And my demographics are, I don't have 20 years to make that happen. In the next 25 years, my industry has to produce as much metal as we have produced in the history of the world to date, with fewer people and fewer people attracted to the industry. I don't have 20 years. Can I shorten the nose somehow?
So good question, and I'll immediately state what I don't know. I have not traced the history of innovation within the mining industry to actually know the true rate of change. So the first thing is, let's set expectations right. What happens usually is that people say, want to be innovative, things are really fast moving in digital technology, so they expect to see a return on investment within 4 years. And that's just insane, okay? I don't know what's sane or insane within the mining industry. What I can say is this, number one, this morning hopefully is worthwhile, even if it's just giving you the vocabulary to ask the question, so you can start to address it, okay? I hope so. And if it's changed that perspective, then the next thing is what's reasonable? What would constitute shortening? So if you're going to get compensated on your success, then try and say, where are we now? And if I can get it down by, if I can reduce it by 20 or 30%, you should get a serious bonus. But you've got to benchmark it, okay? The next thing is, if you look at the business part of this, innovation in process always has and always will trump innovation in product. And most people, because we're materialistic and the things are much easier to see, we look at them from the perspective of the products, how to make that really sexy looking product, as opposed to how do they do that. Apple's biggest innovation is not in the design of their products, but in the design of their process of how they manufacture. Jonathan Ive spends more time there than he does in the design of the iMac or the iPhone. That is why, unlike Nintendo, who couldn't deliver on the, no matter, they had a great product in terms of the Wii, they couldn't deliver. And so they left $1 billion a year on the table. Apple didn't. They can turn up the volume. But let's come back to mining. The challenge is if you have, where people fail is they start losing their jobs and executives start doing because they've got false expectations of what's possible. So frame it in terms of what's reasonable and then set realistic goals and try to exceed them, but be reasonable. And the only way I'd say is that design of process follows exactly the same techniques or responds to exactly the same techniques of design as we find in graphic design, industrial design, or other forms. Treat it as a design problem. And that's exactly what I try to teach in the book on sketching. It's choosing the right place to spend the time, and usually the innovations that are going to give you a competitive advantage are not the ones that your competitors and are the obvious ones. Look for the non-obvious ones that are just sitting there with the low-hanging fruit.
The last big thing we did was the steam engine.
Yeah, that's right.
Last question.
Don't improve the steam engine. Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Mike Kosick, XYZ Interactive Technologies. We have been kind of thinking about 3D positioning for over 8 years, so very much living in that, in the nose. As we've progressed, it's been hard for people to understand without frames of reference. So that when the Wii came along, that was a big thing. When the Kinect came along, we can deliver a low-cost positioning system much cheaper than the Kinect today. But I think that actually making things like smart washrooms and connected things using what's perceived often as an old technology like IR is where we can actually deliver a lot of our value. But it's not until that there are these mass market applications and successes that open the doors to some of those simpler conversations that may have been dismissed a year or two ago because people saw it as an old or dead technology.
Yeah, so I'll do this really a quick response to that is that you're absolutely right. I mean, one thing is that I love Apple. They make my job much easier because if you have success in a space from my competitors, it makes, if Apple didn't exist, why would there be any incentive for Microsoft to change, right? And vice versa. We push them, they push us. That's the competitive part. It's really important to know how we position ourselves when we try to go down this path about where do we find a spot. Connect could open up a great door to let people be literate that there is value there in a space that nobody even understood was a space a year ago. Now, you could do what Corel did and go after the giant head-to-head in that same space and try and compete there. That would be probably suicidal, no matter how big you are. Or you could do what Palm did at the same time that Corel was trying to go head-to-head and say there's a market that's emerging, namely the PDA market, and be innovative about hot sync is what they did, was what made the difference, where they clobbered Microsoft in that space. They had 80+% market share in a space that the Windows CE was trying to go head-to-head, and Palm won. So there's absolutely room for small companies. If you come into a space that people are believing is legitimate because of some other entries and so on and so forth, but then now bring something. But it's not by making a better PDA in that sense. It's by recognizing what's the missing ingredient, hot sync. And by the way, I want to point this out really clearly. Read everything you can find about Palm, and they will give you all kinds of reasons why Palm was successful in its early days. But almost none of them will point to hot sync because that wasn't part of the device. It wasn't a feature. It was the thing that gave you confidence that you could basically photocopy your thing in a minute with one button push, right? There's these spots, but you have to pull back. The human analysis would tell you that. It's confidence and the pain points of using the PDAs. It wasn't the PDAs themselves. Anyhow,
that's great. I mean,
yeah.
we're focused on.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions, so we're going to have to let Bill escaped. He's got to catch another plane. So how about a hand for Bill for all of this?
Thank you very much.
So very quickly, since we're getting close to 9:30, let me just tell you what's coming up in the next few minutes. So we've got a number of concurrent sessions, all beginning at 9:30. In the Gowlings Theatre, you'll find our expert panel on innovative transportation for a sustainable future. Also taking place is our popular elevator pitch competition in the Omers Theatre and the student oral competition in the Talent Theatre. Our Innovation Partners Overview sessions and the Innovation Theatres feature government, private, and public sector organizations offering advice on financing, export, government procurement, and program support for the innovation community. Beginning at 10:15 in the 3D Theatre, David Coombs with Sunny Computer Entertainment will present on the future of gaming platforms. At 10:45 in the Gowlings Theatre, an expert panel will discuss the role of private industry in building the smart grid. Also taking place is our panel on exemplary and emerging models on commercialization in the amphitheatre. Finally, at 11 o'clock, Kunal Gupta with Polar Mobile will speak about the hottest trends in mobile apps in the Omers Theatre, while in the 3D Theatre, you'll find our panel discussion on stereo 3D games. Thanks again, and we'll see you all at lunch. Have a good morning.